It's 1987, a time of video games, weird hairdos, and muscular men, and one young man named Hirohiko Araki is fresh off of making Bao the Visitor and Gorgeous Irene. Araki was fairly successful in these, among other shorter mangas he made, but he wouldn't hit the big time until he released JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 1, Jonathan Joestar, His Youth. What a mouthful. When he was inspired by the works of Fist of the North Star by Buronson and the look of various action movie stars like Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger, he would go on to create a legacy. Oh, and as for the sub versus dub debate, there is no debate. If you want broken English and more screaming, you watch the sub, but if you want a more serious take on the dialogue along with appropriate accents, you watch the dub. I don't know why people make fun of the dub and call it bad. People asked for accents and they got them. I was introduced to the series with the dub, and yeah, I've watched both in English and Japanese. I typically go for the English dub. It has a charm that I think is lost with the sub, and conveys more emotion in my opinion. I can relate to it more. But, with that all the way and the flame war that I've surely started in the comments, let me finally move on to the story. This is Phantom Blood! Inside the carriage is none other than Dio Brando, a young, conniving boy who seeks to bleed the world for all it's worth and become #1. You see, Dario Brando was a drunk who developed some kind of horrible illness. It was Victorian England after all, you'd be lucky to live past 25. Dario got sick and told Dio that when he dies, he should send himself to the Joestar mansion to take everything they've got and find the riches he could never attain as Dario's son. Giving him a letter and packing all of his things, he sends Dio off to live with the Joestars and then dies shortly afterwards. Dio, however, always hated his dad and was grateful for his death, considering Dario caused the early death of his mother and the fact that he had to live in the slums, so Dio is more than happy to join a life of luxury, along with coming into Jonathan's life with the intention of overthrowing and surpassing him. He's kind of a jerk. Speaking of Danny, the anime cut out a small scene of Danny saving Jonathan's life as a young boy. Anyway, with Danny's death, Jojo has truly lost his last best friend. People like to compliment Part 4 and 5 for having really memorable deaths, but I think the death of Danny hits so hard so soon, especially since all this happens in the first episode of the anime. Speaking of Parts 4 and 5, the exotic fashion is something people compliment, but I love the look of Victorian England here. All the suits, suspenders, boots, ties, hats, all that good stuff. It's really charming. From the old-timey swimsuits, bowler hats, the countryside, Part 1 really has its own look and feel, and I really appreciate that. Baron Zeppeli also explains that he's been hunting the stone mask ever since he was a child, when his dad wore the mask after an excavation in Mexico. On the ship ride home from Mexico to Italy, his father donned the mask and killed everyone on board, save for Baron, who jumped to the ocean, was saved by sunlight. The mask stayed on the empty ship and found its way to the Joestar family. Dio himself had been pretty busy during this time. He had little to no strength, but through the help of Wang, he was able to steal the life force of many people in order to recover. One of these people was none other than Jack the Ripper himself, who would become a valuable minion to Dio. With most of his energy restored, Dio now plans on using his mastery of vampiric abilities and an army of zombies to take over all of England and eventually conquer the entire world. The fight against Wang Chen was cut from the anime, presumably due to it ending so fast and having an overall lack of effect on the story. Sure, it gets rid of Dio learning what Hamon is, and so him already knowing what it is in the anime is kinda weird, but it doesn't detract from the story. Let me break away for a bit and talk about Bluford and Tarukas. Some things I skimmed over was their betrayal by Queen Elizabeth, who killed Queen Mary and had them beheaded. Their execution took several attempts due to their hatred and thick skin, making them survive their attacks. Also, they were two of the very few victors of the 77 Rings Challenge, in which you had to climb a mountain while wearing extremely heavy armor, battle 77 opponents, and take their enormous rings to wear around your body. The anime left out the 77 Rings history as it takes away from the action in the moment. Also in the manga, Poco manages to run away from the battle against Dio, where he runs into two of his bullies or something like that, and tries to get them to help in regards to Bluford and Tarukas. In the end, Tarukas kills both of his bullies by eating them alive and wringing out their corpses for blood in front of everybody. I'm glad they got rid of that scene, as personally I don't care much about Poco. He's a silly little character that's kind of out of place, given the intense battle that's going on. Plus the horrific gore present in the manga, I'm sure nobody wanted to see animated. Kinda like how they didn't animate Danny being burned alive. With that out of the way, it's here we learn more of Baron Zeppeli's backstory and the truth about how he discovered Hamon. After his encounter with the Stone Mask, Baron headed all over the world in search of it or anything that could stop it. In India, he was given the answer when he witnessed what looked like a doctor in his early 20s performing a hearing miracle on a patient's leg that anyone else would deem as needed to be amputated. Baron seeked to learn this skill, knowing that the energy the Indian man produced was the exact opposite of that of the Stone Mask. So he was given directions to that of the Indian man's master, Ton Petty of Tibet, and Baron made his way there. In Tibet, he found himself in a grand temple filled with hundreds of Hamon masters, all being taught by one man, Ton Petty. With a Hamon-filled handshake, Ton Petty learned everything about Zeppeli. His ripple energy was so advanced and fantastical that he could read all of Baron's energy from the mere touch of the hand. While his age isn't given in the manga, it's speculated that he's like 500 years old due to his complete and utter mastery of Hamon, yet barely looks like he's 80, maybe 90. At least, that's what I myself has always assumed. Anyway, Ton Petty agrees to train Baron Zeppeli, despite warning him that a gruesome fate awaits him should he continue training. He agrees and soon becomes a Hamon master in training. He was told that one day he would free a young lion from chains in a room ripe with the stench of death, and face a cruel death of his own. So that's Phantom Blood. Is it overlooked? Hell yes. Does it deserve it? Hell no. Jonathan is a noble, amazing person that did not deserve his death whatsoever. Dio deserved to die, but going back to the concept of luck and pluck, Dio was luckily saved by Wang Chen, and Jonathan was plucked from his fairy tale ending. Overall, I gotta say, I love Phantom Blood, and it's my second favorite part, only being beaten by Diamond is Unbreakable. I think the same reason I love Josuke is the same reason I love Jonathan. Both of their defining traits are their kindness and compassion for others, along with their ability to deal out damage and heal. Hamon is an awesome concept, and while yes, stands are really cool as well, the fact that you can only achieve Hamon skills by mastering the martial art of Sendo is just super interesting to me. Dislocating your bones to further attacks, heal nearly any wound, extend your life, and greatly slowing the aging process? There's so many uses for Hamon, while stands can potentially suck and can be pretty situational and might even be utterly worthless, like Cheap Trick in Part 4 that does nothing but talk, or how Strength in Part 3 is just a big boat. Imagine how powerful Jojo would be if Star Platinum could use the power of Hamon. Oh, and speaking of Star Platinum, you know the Aura thing? Jonathan was the first Joestar to do that, and he did it without the use of a stand. Jonathan is just really interesting to me. He has clear-cut goals, he was cheeky as a child and as an adult, he fights with honor but won't hesitate to lay down the hurt, and is overall just a great character. I think the only reason people think he's boring is because he doesn't have a stand, or he doesn't tell jokes, or isn't constantly acting like a total badass. Well, you know, Jojo always having the same stoic, blank expression can get boring too. Sure, he has one-liners and stand power, but Jonathan has cool lines too. You know, speaking of Jonathan, I'd like to share some interesting trivia that comes from Jojonium. Araki reveals that Dio was the first character to be drawn up, not Jonathan, and it was hard coming up with Jonathan's character. It was also hard coming up with Dio's weakness because he didn't write Dio with a weakness in mind. He wanted to create the ultimate controlling evil to contrast with Jonathan's ultimate good. Araki feels that he grew as an author as Jonathan grew as a character. He feels the same way I do when it comes to people thinking that Jonathan is boring because he's a stoic, pure hero. Araki was enamored with the art of karate and wanted to give Jonathan similar, which is why Hamon was introduced. Oh, and as you may notice by now, he redrew some of the cast from Part 1 to be the covers of Jojonium. Dio gets to be there twice because Speedwagon wasn't good enough, I guess. Because Araki's style evolved so much, the main characters obviously look a lot different. Many people don't like this as Jonathan loses his hugeness and looks more like Joseph than anything else. Even though I was not a fan originally, it's kinda grown on me. At least the first cover Jonathan has. I see book 3 Jonathan in my nightmares. Also, I'm glad he drew Dio with gloves that say Dio. Araki mentions that it's hard drawing Part 1 characters again, but it's like coming home to old friends you haven't seen in a while. Oh, and apparently Dio and Danny made up, but just for the cover. People sleep on Part 1 because it's boring and has no stance, but I really hope this video has changed your mind. Part 1 is like the awesome old friend that introduced you to the series in the first place, and just like that old friend, Phantom Blood is awesome.